Today's video is on the endocrine system, specifically how the endocrine system highlights feedback systems in our body. So the endocrine system is made up of endocrine glands throughout your body, the hypothalamus, pituitary, pancreas, etc. And these endocrine glands secrete hormones. And they secrete a couple different types of hormones. Okay. They secrete peptide and protein hormones and steroid or lipid hormones. So hormones are ligands, like we've learned about in cell signaling, and they're secreted from cells or tissues that we call glands, and they travel via the blood to signal other cells. So this is a type of cell signaling we know of called endocrine signaling. Okay. Example number one, we know peptides and proteins. Peptides are actually short amino acid sequences. So they're much smaller than proteins, but they still use cell surface receptors. We know what proteins are. Both of these are going to produce fast responses and often large responses. They're both going to use cell surface receptors. And examples of protein hormones could include insulin, glucagon, oxytocin, growth hormone, etc. Steroids, we know, are lipids. These are ring-shaped structures. Okay. These produce slower, longer lasting responses, and they use intracellular receptors because remember, steroids are hydrophobic, as are the phospholipids. They're small. The steroids can go inside the cell to produce a response. Examples of these include testosterone and estrogen. There are other hormones, but I just wanted to give you a general idea about hormones. We're actually going to spend the majority of our time on the back of this big sheet talking about feedback systems. So go ahead and flip your big sheet over. Okay. When we talk about feedback systems today, we're going to talk about positive feedback and negative feedback. This video is primarily going to focus on on negative feedback. So blood glucose regulation is an example of negative feedback. When I say negative feedback, I want you to think about the thermostat in your house, okay? You're returning to a set point. I don't want you to associate negative feedback with decreasing. Negative feedback can be increasing to return to a set point. So let me give you an example with blood glucose. Let's say your x-axis here is time, and your y-axis here is blood glucose levels. And we're going to measure that in milligrams per milliliter. Okay. And let's say that the set point, your body wants to have, let's say, about 100 milligrams per milliliters of glucose in the bloodstream at any one time. So this is the set point, which is 100 milligrams per milliliter. Okay. So negative feedback means if your blood glucose level is rising above this set point, then your body will put systems into place to cause it to decrease. So the stimulus, blood glucose increasing, and the response, blood glucose decreasing, are opposite. However, if your blood glucose level falls too low, your body will put systems into place to cause it to increase. Again, negative feedback because the stimulus, blood glucose decreasing, and the response, blood glucose increasing, are opposite. So you're going to continue to oscillate around this set point to maintain homeostasis. So this video is going to focus on negative feedback and talk about blood glucose regulation. And then a different video will focus on positive feedback. Okay. So there are 5 different parts of a feedback loop. Okay. The first part is your stimulus. What does your body recognize as a change? The sensor is the organ or structure in your body that recognizes this change. We'll make that orangey pink. The integrating center is what processes that information. We'll make that kind of, I don't know, salmon color. I don't know what color that is. The effector is what is going to produce the change or the response. We'll make that blue. And then the response is what actually happens. So in positive feedback, more stimulus is more response. But today we're specifically talking about negative feedback. Okay. The response is opposite the stimulus. And again, to maintain homeostasis here. So this is an example of negative feedback here. Okay. So let's look at blood glucose. We're going to start with after eating. So I'm going to make this purple. That's our stimulus. After eating, your stimulus is that your blood sugar level increases. The sensor that senses that information is in this organ right here, our pancreas. So our pancreas has sensed that the blood glucose level has increased above your set point. The pancreas is also the integrating center. The pancreas knows that to maintain homeostasis, your blood glucose level should be somewhere between 90 and 110 milligrams per milliliter. So the pancreas is going to compare your blood glucose, which is above that, to its set point, and it's going to activate beta cells in your pancreas. So the convenient thing about blood glucose regulation is the pancreas is both the sensor and the integrating center and the effector. So the effector here are beta cells. So these aren't immune cells, by the way. These are beta cells in the pancreas. And what they do when your blood sugar level rises is they increase insulin. And they're going to secrete it into the bloodstream. Okay? So it's going to be secreted into the bloodstream, and that's going to generate a cell signaling pathway in its target cells and a response. So let's talk about the response. Your response right here can be in the target cells. These target cells are going to have cell surface receptors that are specific to insulin. So insulin will bind to these cell surface receptors, and depending on the type of cell, they'll provoke a specific response. So for example, in a body cell, it'll cause the body cell to absorb glucose. If this target cell is a liver cell, it'll cause the liver cell to do two things: absorb glucose, and second, convert glucose, which is a monosaccharide, into glycogen, which is a polysaccharide. So it's storage, right? Both of these will have the response of decreasing blood glucose. So the stimulus was an increase in blood glucose, and the response was a decrease in blood glucose. That is an example of negative feedback right here. And that would be this on the curve. You eat, your blood glucose goes up, and the response is you decrease blood glucose. Let's look at this part of the curve right here. What about if you're between meals or you're sleeping? The stimulus here would be blood glucose levels have decreased. Okay? Again, the sensor that's going to sense that is going to be in the pancreas, and the pancreas is the integrating center as well. So once again, this integrating center is going to compare your low blood glucose levels down here, right? Your low blood glucose levels with a set point and say, we have to raise blood glucose levels. But it's not going to activate the same cells because we're trying to raise blood glucose levels. So the effector in this case conveniently is also in the pancreas, and it's called the alpha cells. So the alpha cells in the pancreas will make and secrete a different hormone called glucagon. Okay? Glucagon is also going to be secreted into the blood, and it's going to travel via the bloodstream, to other cells, and these other cells also happen to be on the liver, but they have a different type, let me make a different shape, a different type of cell surface receptor that's going to be sensitive to the glucagon, okay? And they're going to trigger a different response. So in this case, the response will be, okay, the liver will break down the polysaccharide glycogen and release glucose. Make sure you can see that, into the bloodstream. And so the response here will be an increase in blood glucose. And that's still an example of negative feedback because the stimulus was low blood glucose, the response is high blood glucose. Those are opposite each other. So that is still an example here of negative feedback. What could go wrong? Well, some things that could go wrong are type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So let's briefly discuss those. In type 1 diabetes, sometimes called juvenile diabetes, and we've talked about this before, this is autoimmune. So your immune system destroys beta cells, so you can't make insulin. So that's a problem with reducing blood sugar levels, okay? In type 2 diabetes, sometimes this is called adult onset, your cells become less sensitive to insulin. This could be because of lack of exercise, poor diet, obesity, genetics. So you're still making the insulin. So in type 1 diabetes, you're killing these cells, you can't make insulin. In type 2 diabetes, you're making insulin, but your target cells are like, nah, I'm busy. I'm not going to listen to you. They actually remove the receptors off their cell to be like, no, I'm cool. I'm not going to listen to you. You have been eating too many bad for you things. You haven't been exercising. You have a genetic component. And so your body is less sensitive to insulin. So both related to insulin, but a little bit different. So that's an example of a feedback system related to negative feedback. Briefly with positive feedback, and I'll do a whole different video on this, or we'll do this together in class. Briefly with positive feedback, like childbirth, more equals more. So in order to have a child, you have to have stronger and stronger contractions so the child is born. So actually, we'll draw the graph and end it there. So if this is time, and this is contractions, more contractions trigger more contractions until the child is born. So more is more, right? So we say response is increased until the desired effect is achieved. Fruit ripening is the same way. The fruit keeps ripening until it rots, right? But we'll deal with this one later. Okay. Thank you so much for watching my video on the endocrine system. Have a good day.